Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So first, a couple of quick questions. How many of you today have flown in today especially to see this TEDx event? Really? Thank you. Okay, another question. How many of you have flown anywhere within the last 2 to 3 months? We're getting there. Last question. How many of you have flown anywhere ever? That's more like it. As we can see, air travel is extremely common, and it must be an efficient way to travel too, if you busy people choose to do it. If you just put your hand up, you're clearly not alone. This graph shows the number of passengers in millions traveling by plane each year. And this shot shows the number of planes in the sky at any given time. And this is just over America. Think what it's like on a global scale. My name is Ben Clark, and I'm going to be talking about the physics of flight, how it can be inspired by nature and be beautifully simple, and yet why we should not take this masterstroke of engineering for granted. I don't know if you've ever stopped to think about how flight actually works, but one of the points of my talk is to help us appreciate the value of both nature and science, and to not just take things for granted. I'd also like to say, though, that a lot of the physics of flight is beautifully simple, even for non-scientists. Another idea is that relatively small changes, thanks to the observation and skills of engineers, can make a big difference, not only to how we fly, but also to how efficient and sustainable our favorite form of transport can be in the future. I'll be taking you on a short flight, and I want to really focus on the bits that we can often see when we fly row 20 backwards on an A320 or something similar. These are the parts that we most readily associate with the natural flight of birds, the wings. Does this view here look familiar? This is what you can clearly see from the window of the plane if you're seated near the wing. I need to introduce 3 key components of which I shall be talking about that are based on the wing. These are the flaps, ailerons, and winglets. Here they are labeled on the screen. I'll be talking about them when they are most required, but you must remember that they are needed for the entire flight. So ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts, sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight. I should apply for a steward course. So first is takeoff, as it makes most sense to start from the beginning. The main parts used for takeoff are the flaps and engines. You may have seen the pilots extend the flaps at the back of the wing. The flaps simply extend the surface area of the wing, thus generating more lift needed for takeoff. The best way to feel this is when you stick your hand out of the car window at a curved angle. We've all done this when we were younger, haven't we, parents? Come on, be honest, it's no secret. Your hand will be pushed back and will be forced to rise up. Next is cruise, which is essentially the altitude at which the plane is not going to climb anymore. You can distinctively realize this as the captain usually makes his or her short flight update speech during this time. After taking off, the pilots will have retracted the flaps and gear, or wheels, to make the plane more aerodynamically shaped. This aerodynamic shape allows the plane to fly easier and faster whilst using less fuel. Although they are working the whole flight, it is mainly at cruising altitude that the winglets come in. To explain the winglets, I need to go back a bit in history. This is one of the small tweaks of engineering that have made a huge difference to the efficiency of flight that I mentioned in my introduction. Planes used to be made without winglets, as we can see on this picture. But in 1973, during the Yom Kippur War, in the ongoing Arab-Israeli conflict, there was an oil crisis, which forced up the prices of petrol, diesel, and of course aviation fuel. The dramatic price hike was felt keenly across the rest of the world, and during this time, engineers had to conjure up a way to decrease fuel consumption and save money. The idea of winglets was first hit upon by an American aeronautical engineer by the name of Richard T. Whitcomb. Part of his inspiration was seeing how birds glide, and he noticed how the tips of their wings pointed up when they tried to gain more lift. What a beautifully simple idea, straight from nature. He set about to test this new theory, and sure enough, it worked just as he had expected. So now that we've touched on the history, let's look at the physics. When planes fly, they create high and low pressure on the bottom and tops of the wing. High pressure air will always try to get to low pressure air. During this process of high pressure air going around the end of the wing, mini tornadoes, otherwise known as vortices, are created. When vortices are created, something called induced drag is produced. This decreases lift and therefore increases fuel consumption. The winglet, on the other hand, reduces the amount of high pressure air going around the end of the wing, thus smaller vortices are created. This may sound horribly complex, but it's actually a good example of how simple tweaking can help make things more efficient and sustainable, and also about how some good can come out of a pretty big crisis thanks to the power of nature, human observation, thought, and ingenuity. When coming into land, the pilots extend the flaps and wheels and all the other necessary parts in the approach. But I can just hear you asking that question. Ben, you've just said earlier in the flight that the flaps generate lift during takeoff. Surely you want the opposite for landing. My answer to that is this. During landing, the pilots will extend the flaps more, causing aerodynamic drag to slow the plane down and make it descend faster. Now, during the approach to the destination airport, you might wonder how on earth, or should I say how in the sky, does the plane tilt or bank to turn, just as it does soon after takeoff. This is done by the ailerons near the tip of each wing. They turn the plane by one of them tilting up and the other one going down, and vice versa. To give an example, let's say the plane is going to want to turn left. The aileron on the right wing moves down, thus generating lift, just like the flap system. The aileron on the left wing tilts up, thus decreasing lift. It is this combined effect that turns a massive aircraft weighing 82,000 pounds in a particular direction. Beautifully simple, but also completely ingenious. In case you'd not noticed, you've now landed and are back on the ground, much more likely than not, safe and sound. Of course, there's a lot more to flight than this, the power and thrust of the engines, and all the other design and technology that's involved. But TEDx is not about lectures, but more about introducing a new idea and asking people to perhaps think about things in a different way. So what's the point of my talk? Just to show you how things we may consider to be hugely complicated and beyond our understanding can in fact be unpacked with a little bit of physics, which is a beautiful subject. It is also, however, about how ingenious human beings can be, and how we can learn a lot from our natural environment, just like Mr. Whitcomb watching birds in flight. Another point is that I don't think people should take all these things for granted. Just the other day, an anti-pilot flight skeptic said that there was probably just a takeoff and landing switch to get the plane from A to B, and that was it. This caused me great offense. We must remember that humans are the battery that powers the computer, and we are the ones that can harness the amazing power of physics and the natural world. Without human observation, ingenuity, and motivation, this would be impossible. Yes, we depend more and more on technology, but ultimately everything depends on the basic laws of nature and physics and the power of the human mind. To conclude, I'd like to think that next time you're on a plane, you maybe don't just take flying for granted, and that you perhaps think about how we can use science to achieve amazing things like flight, which perhaps we can make more and more sustainable in the future, thanks to more lessons from nature. My name's Ben Clark. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed our flight.